Good morning. As we move further along in this week, we're going to turn our attention now to a poem that was written over 1,000 years ago, most likely. The title of it is Beowulf. Many of you may have read it in high school or even in some of your other classes from college. One of the things that we'll be doing with this is trying to apply the theories that we have learned from Charles Taylor about the enchanted world to this particular poem. But as you're reading, I want you to pay attention to a couple of things. I'd like for you to think about the similarities and the differences between the world of the poem, this adventure story about a hero by the name of Beowulf, and our own world. I think one of the things that you'll find is that although the tale seems very foreign at times, there are also some pretty striking similarities. You'll notice that the hero of the poem is struggling to understand what it means to live in a political system where he is trying to figure out and to navigate the power relationships. You'll see that this poem tries to define what bravery is, which is something that is pretty central to our modern concept of who we are. You'll see that the poet is exploring the idea of the unknown, something that should be fairly familiar to all of us. And more to our specific purposes for this course, the Beowulf poet is trying to figure out what the nature of evil is. All of these things are familiar, at least, and I think it's worth pointing those out because in some ways this poem does seem pretty unfamiliar to us. I want to provide a little bit of context for this particular poem as well, for you to be thinking about as you're reading. You're going to be sitting most likely in your living room or in your office reading this poem silently. When it was originally created, that would not have been the case at all. More than likely, this was a poem that developed over the course of a number of years with multiple people telling it around campfires as people were drinking mead or beer. Actually, I'll share with you an experience that I had last year. One of my colleagues created a Beowulf bonfire, and we sat around the bonfire with her class and read portions of the poem out loud, and it was a really neat experience. What you realize is that in that situation, people are coming and going, people are hearing parts of the poem, some are paying attention to all of it. But it certainly was something quite different than sitting down and reading it from beginning to end. So keep that in mind as you're reading. The other thing that I would ask you to keep in mind is that we need to apply Taylor's ideas judiciously. And by that I mean that while the people who experienced this poem originally, the people who composed it, probably did have an understanding of the enchanted world, as Taylor puts it, that is quite different from our own, I think it's nevertheless important to remember what they would and would not have believed. I think it's unlikely that the people who heard this poem really believed that a hero could, as Beowulf does at one point in the poem, swim underwater for 9 or 10 days at a time while holding his breath and fighting a giant sea monster. They understood that that didn't happen. They saw people drown on a regular basis, more than likely. Similarly, I think it's unlikely that the people who listened to and experienced this poem really thought that lurking just around the corner in the woods was a gigantic monster that was going to come in and slaughter them all. All of this is a way of saying that in some ways I think what this poem is doing is exploring the nature of evil. And the evil monsters that we see are what we might call an embodiment of evil. The poet imagining if all of these evil forces in the world that the people back then did believe in, if they were to take physical form, what would they look like and what might it mean to battle with them? So keep all of those ideas in mind as you read, as you think through this poem. Following your reading, there is a brief, actually not too brief, but there is a discussion forum assignment for you to discuss this poem with your classmates. And I look forward to seeing your ideas, to hearing your thoughts about this poem, and to thinking about how you would apply Charles Taylor's work to this text that was produced in the very time period about which Taylor is writing. So I look forward to seeing your work.